let's talk about Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
You posted an amazing article on your page about the myths of Thanksgiving. I think
Mm-hmm.
most of us kind of know. Well, I would say well, I don't know, maybe they don't, but we know to some degree that it basically was a massacre, and the Pilgrims weren't these great people, and whatever the case may be. So
Mm-hmm.
break it down for us. And this is not to say you can't eat some turkey. It's not to say that.
Right. No, that's
I
fine.
just yeah, but it's important to know the history. Maybe at the dinner table you can talk about this history. So
Sure.
what are the things that we should know about Thanksgiving as it relates to Native folks?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not telling people not to celebrate thanks with their
Right.
families. I'm never
Right.
saying that.
Exactly.
But I did a post on TikTok that kind of started it all off, and it's got like 127,000 views in the past 5 days talking about this history. So people don't know this stuff.
Yes.
And but people get it confused. They think that Pilgrims and Indians sat at a table with turkey and cranberry, and but that's not what happened. It started in 1620 when the residents of Plymouth were first taught by Squanto, who was a native dude who's like, here's how you plant things like corn, beans, and squash. And they had a brutal time, but they eventually were able to harvest some food, and there's only 23 remaining after all this. And they were like, we made it, we have a bounty, we're able to actually harvest this. So in 1621, they're like, yay, we lived, and they're so excited that they're setting off guns. There's 23 of them there. And the Wampanoag, there was a group of Wampanoag men, and there was 90 of them. So the settlers were setting off guns. The Wampanoags went there. They're like, what's going on? And they're like, can you imagine having 23 of you and 90 dudes walk up? I'd be like, So they were nervous, and there was not enough food. So they went, and the Wampanoag actually went and they hunted some deer. They and this feast they all kind of decided to come together and have lasted 3 days. And there was a treaty between the Wampanoag and England, but this celebration was never repeated. It just so happened to happen. Abraham Lincoln, in the middle of an unrest and civil war, said, we need to have a story of people coming together. So he told this false tale of Pilgrims and Indians eating together in this show of solidarity and for Thanksgiving. I don't, just like to show that, look, we all came together. We can all be as one. But what really happened was
Abraham Lincoln did that.
Yeah.
Abraham Lincoln is trifling ass.
Yeah, Abraham Lincoln also set off the largest mass execution in history, which happened to be of Native people, Dakota 38 hanging. So, and he actually said, "Yeah, go ahead, let them hang." But in 1636, there was a murdered white man who was found in a boat. And they didn't know who did it. It could have been anybody, but there was an English major by the name of John Mason who says, you know what, this has got to be the Pequots. So he rallied his troops. He grabbed all his troops to burn down wigwams of 400 men, women, and children. Burned them to death, just because they thought this white man was killed by them without proof. And
lynching. Basically lynching.
Well, he said, and I have his words written here, we must burn them, such a dreadful terror, let the Almighty fall upon their spirits, that they would flee from us and run into the very flames. Thus did the Lord judge the heathen, filling the place with dead bodies. So that's his quote. That's what he said. So the governor of Plymouth, his name was William Bradford, he came out the next day, and he says, those that escaped the fire were slain with the sword, some hewed to pieces, others run through with their rapiers, so that they were quickly dispatched, and very few escaped. It was conceived thus they destroyed about 400 at this time. It was a fearful sight to see them thus frying in the fire. Horrible was the stink and scent thereof, but the victory seemed a sweet sacrifice, and they gave the prayers thereof to God, who had wrought so wonderfully for them. And so the day after, he says, from that day forth, this shall be a day of celebration and thanksgiving for subduing the Pequots. And for the next 100 years, every Thanksgiving day ordained by a governor was in honor of the bloody victory, thanking God for the battle that was won. That's our celebration of Thanksgiving. So people immediately say, well, you're telling me not to celebrate Thanksgiving. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying celebrate thanks. There's actually an Iroquois, a Mohawk prayer of thanks that we do say every year. I'm telling people to just know your history and celebrate thanks with your family, you know, but just remember, you know, now personally, my wife and I do fast on that day. And it's just something that we personally choose to do. And I'm not telling anyone else to do that, but it's what we do. And I don't represent every Native person. I represent myself and my family.
Mhm.
But that's just my choice, you know, and I certainly don't expect people to have to make, you know, that choice or tell their family, I'm not going to talk to you again on Thanksgiving. That's not what I'm saying. But I do want people to know this is the history. We deserve to know our histories. We deserve to know our Native history. We deserve to know our Black histories. We deserve to know the histories that have been disregarded and left out of the conversation. You know what? Because we are not these stupid people, you know, because, you know, in the Declaration of Independence, I'm called a merciless Indian savage. Our Declaration of Independence is merciless Indian savages. That's what our Declaration of Independence is, right there. Right there, you know, but
Mm.
we're not these stupid people who are incapable of voting or doing things like the Electoral College used to be, because we didn't have enough to we didn't know enough to read or write. So that's why they did our votes for us and all of that stuff. So, you know, so this is why I write about these histories. I tell these histories and people get furious, you know, but I am incredibly, incredibly fortunate to have talked to Congressman John Lewis before he passed away. And he looked at me and he says, you know what? Use your pen, use your camera, and get into good trouble. I was like, who gets that? You know,
Right.
wow.
That's right.
Civil rights icon tells me that. So I'm going to.
That's
So
right.
I can't even tell you how much I appreciate you asking me on to share this, because it's not something, you know, people of color, we don't get to share our voices a lot, you know. So this is
No,
amazing.
don't.
And good on you for having this show. Good on you for what you're doing. I'm proud of you, you know, telling people knowledge. It's incredible. You should be
Yeah.
proud of yourself. I'm sure your family and your ancestors are proud of you too.
Well, thank you. I mean, I just, you know, again, it's not telling people not to do whatever they've been doing for a
Right.
long time, but you
Exactly.
just got to be informed. You got to be in. I mean, to me, this would be like having a holiday on the anniversary of the Tulsa massacre. Like, you know, and I understand this is how it's laid down, but that we gotta really, you know, just put some context behind it. I've always said Happy Turkey Day. That's what I've always
Yeah,
said. You
right.
know, let me just say Happy Turkey Day. You know, let me just do something. But you know, we have so many commonalities, and the massacres that we've seen with Native people, the Trail of Tears. I mean,
Mm,
all these things. You know, we got. I mean, I just figured out a few years ago that Native folks didn't get the right to vote until 1962.
right.
1962. I mean, mind you, we're under Jim Crow, but there was portions of us, especially in the North, who could vote. But
Mm-hmm.
1960 frickin' two?
Right.
Really?
I know, right?
I just said, this is insane. This doesn't make any sense.
Mhm.
And one more
Mhm.
thing I'd love for you to break down
Yeah,
is,
sure.
if you can briefly, Pocahontas. You have an amazing 8-minute video about
Mhm.
Pocahontas, but you know, people look at Pocahontas as some Disney character,
Yep.
and it's actually a really disturbing history. And I was
Mhm.
so outraged that Trump would refer to Elizabeth Warren as Pocahontas.
It
I mean,
kills me every time.
it would be like, I, it would be like calling a black person running for office like a Sambo. Like
Mhm.
it's so vile that he would do that. But just break it down for us briefly, the history of Pocahontas.
Well,
Why we should not be calling anybody that.
sure. Well, it's I am a journalist who did literally 10 years of research on Pocahontas. I interviewed family members, sacred historians, direct descendants, looked into her actual, family lines, uh, talked to several tribes about it, read books on it that written by tribal members. And Pocahontas is nothing to do with the Disney story. Absolutely, completely, 100% wrong. There's a Disney executive who actually was recorded when he said this, that said, well, we actually knew the history, but we wanted Pocahontas to look sexy.
Hmm.
And First of all, Pocahontas, if you've seen the movie, Pocahontas never fell in love with John Smith. And matter of fact, she was about, when he arrived to Jamestown, he was about 30 years old, and she was actually about 8 years old, based on the timeline. And she was also said that she saved his life. She did not save his life. They would never have let a child out and about, and she would have had to travel many, many miles in a dugout canoe, which weighed several hundred pounds, and she would have to have been 8 years old, pick up a several hundred pound dugout canoe, went out to where he was. And not only that, he wouldn't have been threatened to be killed by the tribe because he was named a werowance, which a werowance is essentially the chief of his community, essentially the leader of his community. So he was a white werowance of Jamestown. But what happened to Pocahontas is because and I want to just say very quickly, this is some very disturbing content of a sexual nature. So, I'm sorry, folks, but just to give you a warning. But because the settlers were sexually assaulting children, they were sexually assaulting women, and women were known to jump in front of the men and say, "Please don't touch my children, take me instead." Because it was getting so rampant and so horrified, because such a thing in the Powhatan culture and the Powhatan Confederacy and the tribes of that, it was absolutely unheard of. That this type of stuff, if it ever did, they would completely be disbanded from the tribe, never to be seen again. Because it was getting really, really volatile and people were stealing and doing all these things, they were like, look, they were told, look, they are going to revolt against us, in Jamestown. So what they did is they said, well, you know what? Powhatan's the leader. Let's kidnap his daughter, who is Pocahontas. So Captain John Argall went down, found Pocahontas, and she was staying with her family at another area. Pocahontas was about 16 when they went to go kidnap her. She was married to a native young man, and she had a baby. So they took the baby out of her arms, gave it to the women of the family, killed her husband, then kidnapped her and brought her to Jamestown. Then she was moved back and forth between areas. When she was in Jamestown, she was repeatedly sexually assaulted, became pregnant, and then married, only because John Rolfe wanted the tobacco recipe, because Pocahontas, the leaders of the tribe were holy men who were her relatives, and they made such good tobacco. It was the only thing that could compete with Spanish tobacco, who was really infiltrating the area. So when he married her and they converted her name to Rebecca because she became Christian, he got the tobacco recipe and became so successful, they literally had to tell settlers, look, you guys have to grow food. And then when she was taken, after marrying John Rolfe, she was taken to England, where she was very healthy at about 19 years old. Her family went with her. They were like, wow, she's healthy. They paraded her around England to show how we could convert the savages. They actually got funding for another trip. On their way back, she was with her family. She was healthy, 19 years old, vibrant, had dinner with Captain John Argall and John Rolfe, her husband. Immediately after dinner, according to the family, immediately after dinner, she vomited and died. They say she was poisoned. Instead of bringing her back to her father, who she had never seen again after being kidnapped, they took her back to Gravesend, England, and buried her. And her family members were sold into slavery.
Jesus.
So not the cheerful, happy Pocahontas, singing. And by the way, there are no cliffs along the coast of Virginia along this line, so she couldn't have jumped off a cliff either and dove into the water.
I got to tell you, there's a horribly disgusting Disney film called Song of the South back in 1946. It's
I remember.
A deeply racist film. It's not, it's basically banned at this point because it's so wildly racist.
Was that with Brer Rabbit and the Tar Baby and all that stuff?
Right, exactly. And this Pocahontas should be banned at this point. Like, they shouldn't even be. If you got kids out there, do not show them Pocahontas. Like, it's as offensive as Song of the South. So I just wanted to give folks some perspective on that.